Another edition to Eye on the Issues. Today we were talking about civil forfeiture. Well, what does that mean? Well, attorney Steve Klein is going to join us right now to tell us a little bit more about what people at home need to understand about civil forfeiture. What's the status of the laws right now, and what do you need to know to protect yourself? Hey, Steve, how are you?
I'm really well, Mike. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Why don't you give us a little background? Well, what is civil forfeiture?
Well, in Wyoming, civil forfeiture goes back a few decades under state law, and it was part of a nationwide addition to the nation's drug laws. Basically, a tool sold as a tool as part of the war on drugs. The history of it goes back centuries. It's believed that it really started with maritime law. That the idea was that if somebody sent some cargo to the United States and there were some kind of European ship owner and they didn't pay their taxes, then we can't convict this guy of a crime, but we can go after the ship when it's in the harbor and take the cargo or take the ship itself. And that's so that it sort of made sense, but then it sort of evolved into a tool in the Prohibition era. The idea that we're going to go after proceeds, we're going to go after property that's related to the crime. And in principle, there's nothing wrong with that. It's really the way that the government goes about it under federal law and even still under Wyoming law that's a problem. And that is that they take the property and they take the property itself to court. So you're going to see all sorts of cases like the state of Wyoming versus $75,000, not to be too specific about it. And then they're going to basically put the property owner in the position of proving the property is legitimate instead of the state proving that it's actually proceeds of crime. In 2014, we really began an effort to reform in earnest Wyoming law. And in 2016, that finally occurred. It used to be for several decades that it was basically on the property owner to go to court and prove that the property was legitimate. And this would often happen. The State Highway Patrol would pull people over and they would find a large amount of cash or even a little bit of cash and say, oh, well, we think this is drug proceeds, we're going to take it. And then the owner, if they even made it to court, would get there about a year later and the cards are stacked against them. It's basically your word versus the police. And unfortunately, courts tend to take the word of the police a little too heavily. So the reform in 2016 put a lot higher standards on the government that they had to prove by what's called clear and convincing evidence that the money or the property is in fact related to the drug trade. And that was a good reform. I stand by that reform. It was hard fought. We tried to get all the way to what was called criminal forfeiture. The idea that, well, if it's a drug law we're trying to enforce, then drug dealers need to be convicted of the crime and then we'll go after the property. It's going to be that kind of order of operation. Unfortunately, Governor Matt Mead vetoed that bill after it passed overwhelmingly the Senate and the House. And we were stuck going into the next session with Mead having several years left in office, and the legislature got a little skittish, shall we say, despite passing it overwhelmingly. So we ended up passing those minor reforms I just spoke about, and that was a great start. It was a great reform, but in the meantime, Wyoming still has a problem, and we really should go the extra mile and implement a criminal forfeiture system.
So did we ever find out why the governor or who motivated, who coaxed the governor into vetoing that?
There was a heavy I've never had a lobbying effort so at times contentious against the police lobby. And Wyoming, I remember from Governor Mead's veto message basically saying Wyoming has passed the test because Wyoming isn't as bad as other states. And I agree with him. That the thing is, he's not wrong that Wyoming was not engaging in what was called policing for profit. You've had other states where the money goes right into the law enforcement funds, and they're basically targeting, deliberately going after cash and other property. Some very egregious examples in other states. Wyoming had some bad ones, though. And there was some other really bad practices that came to light that are no more. My understanding is they don't exist anymore. The Attorney General's office handles all civil forfeitures statewide. And there was a policy, basically, I mentioned earlier, they would sit on the property up to a year. They would seize it and wouldn't even file a lawsuit against the property for up to a year. That was problem number one. That doesn't exist anymore. Now there has to be a hearing within 30 days of seizure. Then number two, big problem was that they would offer the property owner 10% to go away. So that's another kind of funny, like, well, wait a minute, this is supposed to be drug money, but the government is going to give the alleged drug dealer 10% of the money back. And we were often talking low numbers. And I think the average forfeiture at the time was maybe around $3,000. You'd get bigger numbers. But, my favorite, I think, was Kendall Croker when he was still in the legislature. He asked this of the highway patrol. I think, why, when you're pulling over somebody and you find cash in their car on I-80, why is it the cash gets seized, but the car doesn't, if this person's engaged in drug trade? And there was a little bit of hemming and hawing, like, whoa, we don't want to abandon, that poor drug dealer to get caught in Rawlins, So a little bit of definitely, shall we say, some problems with the argument on the part of law enforcement. But that was kind of the summary that takes us up to today.
Right. And so what are you hoping to see from a legislative standpoint going forward? How are there lawmakers that are willing to push this again, or where do things stand?
I'm really not sure. I think there's what I wrote about recently was this case, the state of Wyoming versus $75,000. And this is really why this argument it's the principle of the thing. And that's why I've enjoyed it so much, because it's the kind of situation where we are holding our government to the highest standards, even in situations where a lot of drug money is going to walk. Drug dealers are often pretty smart. They keep the supply and the cash separate. That's why, that's the justification what the police throw out there. Well, that's why when they pull somebody over, they're only going to have cash or they're only going to have drugs. They generally aren't carrying both of those things. The $75,000 case, the property owner was pretty clearly a drug dealer. They even found phones with voicemails on them showing that these drug transactions had occurred, but all of these transactions occurred in California. So the Wyoming Supreme Court basically comes up with a very convoluted conspiracy theory under Wyoming law that said, well, even just by driving across the state with the proceeds and a few, I think the guy had a little bit of drugs on him, certainly nothing he was trying to distribute. And even by that, we're going to say that was a clear and convincing drug conspiracy, and therefore the state has the power. The state of Wyoming has the power to forfeit this money and keep it. And I should add that my big problem with this, the biggest problem, is that very property owner was prosecuted just for simple possession here in Wyoming, and he goes and does a jury trial and he's acquitted. So that is the real rub here, that
Sure.
If you can't nail the property owner with a crime, you shouldn't be taking the property, even though it's pretty obvious this person is up to no good. That's the burden we have to keep putting on law enforcement. And that's not because I want to protect drug dealers, because I want to protect everybody. Because the idea that we're just going to trust the police to take our property and then we'll go get it back doesn't work like that. It shouldn't work like that.
So compare, if you could, Wyoming to other states that are either a lot worse or a lot better. Are there states that really do look out for their citizens here, and then there's some that don't at all?
Yeah, the movement, I think has subsided a little bit. There was a big push again while the time we were doing it. Some other states implemented these a lot of reforms, but it's a constant struggle. I mean, the other thing about eternal vigilance here is, and this is really unfortunate, that segments of Wyoming law enforcement have sort of thumbed their nose at the existing reforms. The biggest instance occurred only maybe within a year or two of the 2016 reforms. Suddenly, the Division of Criminal Investigation, which is the basically Wyoming's mini FBI. It's a law enforcement agency that's part of the Attorney General's office that does criminal investigations, particularly drug investigations. And they came up with this little form that was being used by the highway patrol, because here's how it happens. They'll pull somebody over and they'll ask them if they're carrying cash. And even a law-abiding citizen sometimes gets nervous and thinks when a officer asks them a question like that, that means they've done something wrong. And he says no, and then they search the car. They have probable cause somehow, and they find the cash. And the person says, "Well, it's not mine." They get scared because they're caught in a lie, so then they lie again. Again, what they'll do then is hand them this form that says, "Well, it's abandoned property," or you're basically saying that I don't know where it came from, and you're basically turning over. So that you don't even have a civil forfeiture process at that point. It was just a sort of a surrendering property that you claimed was never yours to begin with. Fortunately, the legislature banned that practice in 2018. The biggest thing another piece of the reform that has to happen is curing what's called silver plattering. The federal government has the same bad civil forfeiture laws that existed in Wyoming prior to 2016. So all too often, a state law enforcement agency, if they might have a line on somebody with a lot of cash, and they might think, we don't have the ability to pursue them under Wyoming law, so we'll loop in the FBI or the Drug Enforcement Agency, which are federal agencies, and we'll give them all the evidence they have, and they can go and pursue a federal forfeiture. And again, like federal law it's the same bad law that we used to have, where the owner has the burden to go and prove it's legitimate instead of the government proving it's illegitimate. That's kind of silver plattering. It's called the equitable sharing program, where if a state agency cooperates with the feds in that way or in any other way, they get a share of the proceeds that are forfeited by the feds. So that's another one of those instances that needs to be reformed. And it's all too often, it's that kind of loophole. The states that have passed the most robust reforms to prevent the police from doing that directly, there's all too often that loophole where they just cooperate with the feds and hand over a case on a silver platter to them. I believe the city of Casper has just re-entered an agreement with the feds. They're going to continue operating on the equitable sharing program. There's really nothing stopping any other agency in Wyoming from doing that. So that's another big step that should be taken in addition to implementing criminal forfeiture.
So what's your advice to people if they do end up in a situation where they're the odd man out? What type of lawyer do they need to get a hold of, and pretty quickly, I gather?
Yeah, there's many. I'm a civil lawyer, right? A constitutional lawyer. There are fantastic educational videos out there about dealing with the police. I strongly recommend looking those up. And of course, again, the right to remain silent, though, is sacrosanct. Definitely, be very, very wary about consenting to searches and things of that nature. But of course, again, this day and age, having a criminal attorney, defense attorney, who you can call, people think, I've done nothing wrong, I don't need to know. It usually doesn't cost anything to have their phone number. And I think especially in Wyoming, there's some fantastic lawyers out there who, when you feel like it's really more about don't take it, lying down, and pursue, vigorously your property if it's seized. But those the fundamentals, yeah, I'm always wary about being because I don't practice criminal law or Fourth Amendment issues, but there are some fantastic go with law professors if you're going to watch those videos, not with people advising you on sovereign citizens, because that's not actually a thing. So don't listen to sovereign citizen stuff.
So call me crazy, but this country's been around for almost 250 years. Why are we still dealing with problems like this?
Oh, well, but look, I always, Mike, you got to take it with a grain of salt. Like we didn't solve all our problems at the founding, clearly.
Right.
And I might have even used this example with you last time we spoke. And most of what I do is First Amendment law. Look, I mean, the same founding fathers who signed, onto the Declaration, and then many of them onto the very Constitution that we hold dear, a lot of them supported the Sedition Act of 1798. And that was one of the most egregious censorship laws. It's a good thing it sunsetted in the early 1800s. And that was a real test of culture and law immediately, under the same people who enacted the First Amendment. So I've got good humor about it. I think these reforms are certainly possible, but I'm not, I understand the frustration of how long it takes to get this stuff done. But Wyoming continues to show you can get this stuff done. The reform is not perfect, but Wyoming has certainly come a long way. And again, we should cross the finish line, turn this, civil forfeiture into a criminal forfeiture system. But, I don't think the frustration, I think we should be encouraged by how far Wyoming has come, as much as we might be frustrated that there's still a ways to go.
Gotcha. So would you say people just go to YouTube, go and type in civil forfeiture, and maybe just civil forfeiture or civil forfeiture Wyoming, and look for some educational videos?
I wish I had someone off the top of my head. There was a great law professor, I think at Regent, who has a great discussion about, interactions with the police and things like that. I'm not the expert in that area, but
right.
Yeah.
Regent University out of Virginia Beach. I know because I went to grad school there. So not for law, but for journalism.
Yeah. Fantastic. I think, but whyliberty.org, of course, our own website, we've written on this issue extensively over the years. There's a lot of great stories and information there. I continue to, take a lot of, satisfaction in the work we've done over the years to not just talk in principle here, but to really describe how asset forfeiture has worked over the years. I wish part of me wants to dive back in and go do an assessment of all the cases at the AG's office that have happened over the last few years. But we did that, now 6 or 7 years ago was the last time we did that. So maybe we will get around to it, but there is already a robust archive there of information.
And once again, you said whyliberty.org to find out more, to sign up for our mailing list, and just to find out what is going on around the state of Wyoming. Thanks, guys, Steve.